Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for coming. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is WWE and really a few key themes. First off, this incredible transformation into a one-of-a-kind media company. Second, how we've managed to make that transformation. Go a little bit deeper into the core of WWE, its media ecosystem, what we see as the multiple growth drivers moving forward, and then finally our financial outlook in the short term. So first, at the highest level, the company over the last 12 months has done about $870 million in revenue. It's an all-time high. As I mentioned before, the core of the business and 70% of the revenue is its media business. In addition, it does 15 to 20% in the sale of tickets to events and an additional 10 to 15 in the licensing or direct-to-consumer sale of consumer products. From a geographic perspective, around 70% of the revenues in North America, U.S. and Canada, and about 30% outside. If we look at the performance over that time period, revenues are up about 10%, op income up about 40%, adjusted OIBDA up about 30%, and free cash flow is up $95 million to about $149 million. So the results have been stellar all around. When we look at the operating drivers of that performance, few things. Laura mentioned in the introduction, our SVOD service, now 5 years old, has grown at about a 17% CAGR over the last 3 years. We license content into the pay TV ecosystem around the world. That's been a significant driver of growth over the last few years, about a 15% CAGR. And then our international business, including the other two businesses you see up there, have been up in total about 20% CAGR. So these have been the three big drivers of what you've seen in the performance over the last several years, including the last 12 months. Core of the media, and I'll go into this in more detail, but the core is we put content, core live in-ring content 52 weeks a year on pay TV. We have a direct-to-consumer SVOD service for our most premium content, our playoffs, if you will, and then we have a significant presence on the third-party AVOD platform. About 5 to 6 billion hours of consumption of the 1,500 hours of content that we create on those three platforms. About 75% still on traditional pay TV, about 20% on the AVOD platforms, and about 5% on the direct-to-consumer. And again, the 25% at the top is the way we reach our consumers digitally, and 7 or 8 years ago, that number would have been 0. So we talked about some of the consumption of the content. If we look at the digital, our digital reach, we're just under 1 billion social media accounts around the world. So we've got the largest footprint of any sports property in the world. If you look at actual video consumption on YouTube, WWE is the #1 sports network in the history of YouTube. So we've done about 27 billion lifetime video views of our uploaded content, not including UGC. The next largest is Dude Perfect at around 6 billion, and then the NBA is about 5 billion. So from the traditional leagues, the NBA has always been the #2 to WWE, but we've established the #1 leadership position in sports on YouTube. In addition, if you looked across all genres, in the history of YouTube, WWE is the #2 channel on YouTube behind T-Series, which is an Indian music video channel that has about 51 billion lifetime video views. I know there's some people in the audience who know WWE. I know there's some new folks in the audience. Sometimes when people haven't followed us, they'll say, how do you have this much consumption in video across all these platforms around the world? How is it that in, your #1 market out of that 5 to 6 billion hours is India? Right? So 40% of that 40 to 50% of that 5 to 6 billion hours happens in India. And we tell people it's a couple of things. Number one, the context is fairly simple. It's a ring. So there's passion for sports all around the world. Some sports are easier to follow than others. Ring it transcends cultures. Right? So when two men or two women walk into the ring, everyone around the world knows what's going to happen. There's some nuances, but everyone knows what's going to happen. The second element is that we spend a lot of time and energy crafting and creating eternal stories. John Campbell wrote 40 or 50 years ago that there was one basic archetype for storytelling around the world and through time. And he called it the hero's journey or the monomyth. We take that to heart. So, where Luke Skywalker or Katniss Everdeen are going through the hero's journey within their context, John Cena, who's the most followed North American athlete in the world on Facebook, close to 50 million followers alone out of that 950 million. John Cena goes on the hero's journey. So you take this simple context, the ring, kind of eternal storytelling, that's why it resonates in so many places. And we've done it for a long time. So whether it was Bruno Sammartino in the 50s, or Andre the Giant in the 70s, or Stone Cold Steve Austin in the 90s, The Rock in the 2000s, now Charlotte Flair, the current generation, we've been able to create these stars and have used the tools of the day. So it was selling tickets in the 70s and 80s. It was pay TV in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Today it's social and digital, but we create these stars and we amplify them using the tools of the day. It is one of our core competencies. So we've talked about this kind of unique media company. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the transformation. One of the terms that we use internally a lot is reimagine. And so we talk about reimagining every element of the business on a continual basis. And it's at the core of the DNA of the culture. And Vince has been doing it and leading it since he bought the business from his father in the mid-'80s. So he took a business that sold tickets in the Northeast of the United States and created one that toured the entire United States. He took that business and with the advent of pay TV around the world, became a global media company. Today, or last few years, we've been architecting this social, digital, direct-to-consumer transformation, how we amplify the brand and reach as many people around the world as possible. We're in the early days of that, but it's been the successful execution of that is what's driven some of the results that we've talked about before. So I said, important to understand culture. The old saying that culture eats strategy for lunch. So I would say, if you want to understand WWE's culture, that's probably the most important part of it. Winning and this kind of constant reimagination. The media ecosystem, the most important probably few slides that I'll touch on, because to understand WWE, both where it's been, where it is, and most importantly where it's going, you need to have a sense of how we think about the world, and how we think about our content, and how we think about what's happening in the media ecosystem. So I mentioned those 1,500 hours. Across pay TV, our Ring weekly programs, AVOD, our digital and social platforms, and our direct-to-consumer. So the core thing we do, and the biggest percentage of people at WWE are spending their time creating this content, comes across those three platforms. On the pay TV side, our core live weekly content, so that's 5 hours, Raw and SmackDown, Monday and Tuesday nights, live, 260 hours a year, so there's no off season. It's the core of the business, and it's the core of our pay TV strategy. We do other content. We have 3 reality series going on right now, Total Divas, Total Bellas, Miz and Maurice, really important in broadening the brand. We do documentaries within the ecosystem, ESPN, HBO, but the core is the live content. Over 800 million homes, or it's available in over 800 million homes. 75% of that 5 to 6 billion hours consumed is on this content. And Raw and SmackDown in the U.S. has more average viewership than any cable network in prime time. I talked about the ad-supported, the AVOD platforms, primarily the third-party platforms, that number one position on YouTube, the 950 million followers across all the social platforms. We've created close to 50,000 pieces of content over the last several years. We now do about 28 or so billion video views a year, including the user-generated content. So we're the largest by far in the world. It's 20% of our time. So it's that 5 to 6 billion hour, it's over 1 billion hours now being spent on these platforms. And again, if you think back, it wasn't that long ago that number was 0. And then finally, our SVOD platform. So while we have the other two platforms broadly distributed, our core in-ring content, unique short-form content we create on the AVOD platforms, our SVOD platform is to super serve our most passionate fans. $10 a month. It has our core, Raw and SmackDown are the regular season, our playoffs, 12 to 15 special live events sit on the SVOD platform. It has every piece of content that we've created, 10,000 hours. And then we create unique content for the platform. We've done unique local shows, live in ring, the UK Championship, the Mae Young Classic. We'll do our own documentaries on the platform. We've done some reality series. So our biggest fans, our super fans, if you want everything WWE, this is the one home for it. It's the number 2 sports SVOD service in the world. So baseball is number 1. We're number 2. If you believe the outside metrics, the third largest, which is far below WWE, would be UFC and NBA. So the fourth element is talking about the future. Over the next several years, where we see the growth and why we see that growth coming. First, there are some general secular trends that we believe are a tailwind for WWE over the next 5 to 10 years. Number one is the continued value of live entertainment, and that becomes a key differentiator, especially in the bundle. Certainly, the continued broadband penetration in the world is just talking about it. It's unbelievable to me that in 2014, India had 50 million mobile broadband subscribers. This year, that number will probably be somewhere between 600-700 million in our largest market in terms of consumption. Continued growth in banking penetration, whether it's mobile or traditional banking. Again, key if you're going to be a direct-to-consumer company. Emerging market growth. If you're in the media and entertainment sector, the most important driver of revenue into the sector, which then makes the market participants, give the market participants ability to grow, is a growing middle class. So all these things happening around the world, we think are a secular tailwind to a passion brand like WWE. That then gives us some core businesses with solid revenue streams, our live event business, our consumer products business, but really gives us the opportunity on the media business, which has been the big driver of growth over the last 10 years or so into the future as well. Some of the ways that gets there, number of broadband homes, which is growing dramatically. This data is actually a few years old, but you're talking today, not including India, it's probably about 160 million WWE fan homes with broadband connectivity. I don't include India because the research has subtended this. We did not do in India. We'll go back and do that in that market. But that gives us an incredibly robust target for anything that you're reaching digitally. If you look at our average paid subs then on the SVOD service, over the last, since launch, it's grown at around a 39% CAGR. So it's been a big driver for WWE and both revenue growth and profit growth over the last several years. Then on the pay TV segment, if we went back to 2008, our content licensing fees, primarily for the live in-ring content, was about $80 million. This year is about $270 million. We've already locked in for 2020, $440 million with another $108 million up for renewal. So starting in the fourth quarter of this year and heading into 2020, the success of our ability to monetize our core live content will transform the financial performance of WWE. We said, in addition to the U.S., the content's available around the world. So throughout this year into early 2020, we will renew all our major agreements, similar to what we just did in the U.S. So that includes India, the U.K., Middle East, Latin America, China, Germany early in 2020. So really, really important for us here over the next 12 months. Internationally, as I mentioned before, of that 5 to 6 billion hours, 70% of the consumption is happening outside the U.S., with India being the number one market. We've had great success over the last 14 years, so an 11% CAGR, more than quadrupled the revenue coming from outside of North America. We think that the fact that 70% of the consumption is happening outside the U.S., but today only 30% of the revenue are outside North America, we think that that gap closes over the kind of long arc of time because of some of the drivers I mentioned. More broadband penetration, emerging middle class, more banking, all those things kind of give you that tailwind. Last point I'll talk about in terms of looking into the future is data. It has transformed the way WWE operates. It was the birth of the direct-to-consumer service, and the fact that that was going to be such a large business for us was the catalyst for our investment in this area. Today, we've got over 10 million user accounts. We're able to understand how our fans engage with us, what content they like the most, how they prefer to pay when they go to an event, where they prefer to sit, when they shop for products direct to consumer, who their favorite stars are. So all of this allows us to get a really, really deep understanding of our fans. And we say the number one thing we've got to wake up and do every day is put smiles on people's faces. You know, if we do that consistently, we win the battle for time. And that's why we measure hours. That's why I talk about those 5 to 6 billion hours. It is a battle for time. That's what the data is about for us. Understand our fans and be able to give them more of what they love about WWE. And we use it every day. So whether it's understanding that there's a fan out there that really loves AJ Styles and is consuming AJ Styles on the network, and we can point to them and say, hey, did you know that there's a documentary we just did about AJ? You're really going to love it. Or it might be knowing that the last time we were in town, you bought 4 of our higher priced tickets. We also know who you've been watching on WWE Network. Well, guess what? When we come to you and let you know that we're coming back, the message gets tailored more to you. So you really understand, hey, the person who I really want to see is going to be headlining that event. It's going to be different. That's what we know about our fans. There's not one group, monolithic group. Everyone has their favorites. If you're talking about where we should tour, we started a new brand, our development brand, a few years ago. It's housed in Orlando, Florida. It's where we train our next generation. We said, well, we want to tour that. One of the ways we picked where to tour, because that piece of content was available on our direct-to-consumer network, is watching where it was over-indexing. So that's how we started that. So again, the use of data to inform every part of the organization. The last thing I'll touch on is our financial outlook. So for 2018, as we've seen over the last 3-4 years, record revenues. We've had record operating income and adjusted OIBDA. And we've said for this year, 18, record revenues again, record number of subscribers, and adjusted OIBDA of 160 to 170 million. And for 2019, adjusted OIBDA of at least 200 million. So you get this diverse revenue stream, high growth on the media side, very high operating leverage. For us, important to invest back into the business. And we've said the three areas of investment for us: continue to create great, compelling content, focus on these growing segments outside of North America, and then the continued digitization of the business. And as I mentioned before, if our success should lead to record revenues, record adjusted OIBDA, and record sub levels in 18, and then for 19, at least 200 million. So that's it. I appreciate everybody being here. Yeah. Not the OTT network. So of that 5 to 6 billion hours, let's say 50% of that, roughly, is happening in India, but the majority is still happening on traditional pay TV. So in India, which is an interesting question, the model I described of what sits where is a little bit different. When we launched the network in India 5 years ago now, or 4 years ago, when we opened it up to the rest of the world, broadband penetration was at a different level. So we didn't think it was a viable opportunity. So we took the core content, those pay-per-views, and actually licensed them into pay TV. So India is different, right? You have both Raw and SmackDown and the pay-per-views. As we work through this next kind of renewal cycle for us, that'll be one of the questions is how do we think about the SVOD opportunity in India today versus 5 years ago? But today, the SVOD product's not really viable. 5 to 6 is everything. So it's pay TV, it's YouTube, it's direct to consumer. 3/4 of that 5 to 6, so 4 billion of it is still happening on pay TV. YouTube and Facebook will be over 1 billion this year, YouTube primarily. Yep, and that's time spent. Yep. Yeah. They were all different, but 3 to 5 years primarily. Well, the first and the largest one for us was in the U.S., so the largest absolute terms, and that one increased by 3.6 times. So that is the catalyst for this fundamental change in the financial profile of the company starting in the fourth quarter. And we had said for a long time, for a very long time, that we thought Raw and SmackDown, our live content in the U.S. was one of the most under-monetized, mispriced assets in any business relative to what its market competition was doing. So success here helped kind of close that gap pretty significantly. Because the relative performance is at different places around the world. The U.S. was stark in the gap. And actually, we did the renewal 4 or 5 years ago in the U.S., and then this one, you take those together, you're almost at a 5 or 6x kind of growth. So those other markets were never as mispriced. Also, the last renewal cycle, ex-U.S., was a fairly big step up, which is why that gap wasn't as large. But I would say the reality is you don't really know how you're going to do in a market until you're actually at the table. So we'll find out here over the next few months. Yeah, I think, like I said, for us, the biggest use is understanding that our fans are different. So before you kind of you could intuit that, but you couldn't see the difference. Today you can see the difference, which means how you talk to them is different. How you personalize the experience for them is different. We're in the early days. So the digital first companies, the big digital platforms, huge head start because it was in their DNA. If you were more of a legacy player, and I'd put us in that bucket, I think you had catching up to do. I think WWE punched above its weight in kind of how far it's gotten and how fast. But I definitely believe it's table stakes. So whether it's us competing for time with us or us competing for time with others, that's going to be a big part of winning the battle. And we see it today, but we're still in the real early days. Yes, when you're competing for time, unfortunately, there's ever more ways for people to be distracted. So whether it's NBA internationally, whether it's Fortnite, fill in the next blank that'll come along, it becomes an ever more fragmented world. So our view on that is it's super important. There'll be kind of a bifurcation. There's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of ways to distract yourself. And that'll get maybe, that totality gets 50, 60, 70, 80% of the total time across, and it's tens or hundreds or millions of ways. And then there'll be a select few that are passion brands that get the rest of the 30 or 20 or 40%, however you want to break that out. For us, that percentage is less important. It's you want to be in that passion brand. You don't want to be one of the 10 million. You want to be one of the 100 who kind of can cut a little through the clutter. And that's the way we think the world is going to continue to shake out. But yeah, so there's unlimited competition. Yeah, for us, it's a great question. We're about 25 years into India, so we've had a lot of time to inculcate the brand there. China, we're about 11 years in, so it's much kind of, if you think of the S-curve of introducing any product into any market, we're much earlier into the S-curve, probably around that early first inflection point where India, we're pretty high up the curve. So we're investing more and more in China, but yeah, in a different place for WWE. Yep. So the U.S., it's a good question. So our service is a U.S. product. It's an English only, American currency only, but it's available around the world. So 25% of our subscribers are coming from outside the U.S., but U.S. dollars and English. Yes, it's the same. What you'll see in the future for us is we'll begin to tailor that. You'll probably see one or two extra languages. You'll look at multiple currencies, and you'll probably see multiple price points. And again, part of this driven by where we are today versus, let's say, 5 years ago in broadband penetration, mobile payments to deal with the underbanked parts of the world. So you'll see as we'll evolve the product that way. Yeah. Great. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.